In this video, we're going to take a look at REST connector lookups and how they can be utilized to populate fields and to also populate restrictions. In the REST service maintenance window, we're going to go to service lookups and create a new one here. I already have, so I'm just going to edit. In the setup, we will be putting in what our endpoint is. In this case, it's products. And then what the request type is a get, post, put. Next, we're going to define our returnable fields. So which fields out of the response body do we want to provide to the user to map within the integration process? Then we'll define what filters we're going to use. So we're connecting to WooCommerce here, so we're going to use a URL parameter, but we could also be passing this into the body or something like that. If you want to know where to find this, you can look in the documentation for the API that you're working with. In this case, there are many available filters for me to use, but I'm using this particular parameter for SKU. Back in the connector setup, we're going to go to the filter criteria, and here we're going to specify which fields we want to have available for the user to pass in as filters. So unless we check this box for display and filter, it won't show. If you were using a different web service, for example HubSpot, where you want to apply the filter as part of the request body, so you're using a request type of post, and then go into the body tab, and in here putting in the SKU as part of the body. So you can see I'm using those double square brackets, and those are going around the actual body that I'm going to use. And then that variable will be referenced in the filter criteria. So here I've said display and filter, and then that SKU will be mappable the same as my parameter. With this complete, we can now work on REST lookups as mappable fields. So in an integration process, we're going to go to the integration tab, additional columns. And I've already created mine, but you'll create a new additional column with the type of REST lookup. So you'll also have access to any other instances using that same REST definition. I have selected mine, and then I can go and apply the filter. So those pre-filters with variables or parameters, and then which fields I want returned. You can select one or more fields. There are two options available, Lightbound lookup and include lookup result in scripting. A Lightbound lookup means that we will be able to use a calculation in the lookup, so I could use a calculated column instead of the number field. And include lookup result in scripting means the results of this can be used in a calculation. So I'm going to use that option so that I can use this in a calculation. Next, we are going to look at the if no data options. There are quite a few options in here. Continue means that even if no data is found, Smart Connect will continue to function as normal. We can also say return a default value, so you can hard code it. We can return an error. Or there's a couple of exciting new ones in here, which we'll use to do restrictions later, which are restrict line out if data exists, and restrict line out if no data exists. So we'll take a look at those in detail in a minute, but for now let's look at our calculation and mapping. If we switch to the target integration tab and we find our field we want to map, in this case manage stock, we can set that using the REST lookup. And you'll notice that it's the lookup field and then whatever the child field is that we've selected, so there could be a multiple field lookup happening. Next, we'll go into additional columns and create a new additional column. It's a very simple script that we're doing here to take that manage stock equals true and to return the stock inventory. Otherwise, we're just going to return the default value of 0. So just quickly, we're going to map this field as a calculation, which we can see down here. Now, if I run this to a file so we can take a look at the output, you can see that when it was returned false, it returned 0. And if I flip to the other one, when it was returned true, we actually return the real inventory level. So if I were to run this directly to WooCommerce, these would be the values it would send. Next, we're going to look at how to use these REST lookups as restrictions. So back in my integration, let's go to the Target tab, where you can see that I've selected both the create and update product endpoints. So I'm going to use my lookup to dynamically switch between these. So you'll notice the restriction is still set to return true, but if I go to additional columns, you can see that there are two additional columns. One is for new and one is for existing. The restrict new is set to filter data out if data exists, while the update existing will be the opposite, restrict line out if no data exists. So if we just take a look at the existing one, you can see that the filters and everything is the same. And another key point is that neither checkbox is selected, because this I don't want to run before or after, but instead of calculations. So you can see on this line, I've mapped the existing, and on the create, I have mapped the new. Now, it's important to note which one you're mapping where, because that is what restriction is going to be used. So you can't map both to the same one, and we have to create two independent lookups. So they function differently, and we are not using a restriction.